The story opens with a brutal scene. A masked man is seen killing another man, while a woman nearby screams in terror, calling out the victim's name. Without hesitation, the attacker turns to her, pulls out a knife, and kills her as well. Decades later, we meet an elderly man named Henning, quietly packing his belongings into a box. Not long after, he steps out into the rain and makes his way to a police station. Inside, the officers are celebrating a promotion. Marcus is being honored for successfully leading a major case in Department Q. Amid the celebration, Carl, the detective who actually played a key role in solving that case, shows no interest in the party. Instead, he isolates himself in his office, focused on unresolved work. His partner Assad introduces a new secretary named Rose, who will be assisting in Department Q. Outside the station, Carl is unexpectedly approached by Henning, who seems disoriented and speaks in a confusing manner. He claims he found Carl through a newspaper and asks if Carl has received a letter about Thomas and Mary. Assuming the man is drunk, Carl brushes him off and tells him to go home, leaving him standing alone in the rain. Feeling ignored, Henning breaks down. Later that night, Carl returns home and goes to sleep, only to be awakened by a call informing him that Henning has been found dead, believed to have taken his own life. And with that, a forgotten case quietly begins to surface again. This is Department Q, the absent one. This news makes Carl recall the letter Henning mentioned. Curious, he searches for clues and discovers a box filled with documents. Inside, he finds files and photos that appear to be related to Henning's children. On the wall, there are marks suggesting Henning had been investigating something on his own. Carl brings the box back to the office and reviews it with Assad and Rose. The documents reveal that Henning's twin children, Thomas and Mary, were murdered years ago. The case had supposedly been closed, with a man named Bjarne Torgersen confessing to the crime. However, Henning never believed the case was truly solved and continued investigating, which eventually forced him into early retirement. Carl decides to reopen the investigation by looking into Bjarne. After his confession, Bjarne had only been sentenced to 5 years in prison. Strangely, he was released after just 3 years, following a diagnosis of mental illness linked to drug abuse. What makes things even more suspicious is that Bjarne was represented by a high-profile lawyer named Ben Krom, who is known for only working with wealthy clients. Bjarne, however, was neither rich nor famous, which raises serious questions about how he could afford such representation. As they go through the documents, they come across an old-school photo of Thomas. One face in the picture has been circled, a girl named Kimmy. The story then jumps back 20 years into the past. At that time, we are introduced to Kimmy, who is starting her first year at a prestigious boarding school called Griven Home, a place reserved for wealthy and elite families. From the beginning, Kimmy stands out, but not in a good way. She breaks rules, smokes inside the dorm, and quickly becomes someone most students choose to avoid. At the same school, there is a student named Ditlev, a handsome and incredibly wealthy teenager who is admired by everyone. Despite Kimmy's reputation, Ditlev takes an interest in her and invites her to join his circle, along with his close friend Ulrich. Not long after, Ditlev introduces Kimmy to Bjarne, an outsider who is not even a student at the school. From that point on, the group begins sneaking out together, often heading into the nearby forest. Their activities escalate from drinking and smoking to much darker and more reckless behavior. As time passes, Kimmy and Ditlev grow closer, eventually forming a relationship that feels like a typical teenage romance on the surface. The story then returns to the present. Carl and Assad finally track down Bjarne, who admits that he committed the crime. However, he explains that he was only 16 at the time and has already served his sentence. Carl finds it hard to accept how someone involved in a double murder could receive such a short punishment, especially after being released early. He also questions how Bjarne could afford a high-profile lawyer like Ben Krom. Bjarne claims that his mother took out a lifetime loan to pay for it, and he now lives comfortably, even owning a luxury car. When pressed further, he explains that he made his money through stock trading after getting out of prison. While parts of his story check out, it still leaves a major question unanswered. If his family was drowning in debt, where did he get the initial capital to start investing? Elsewhere, Ditlev is now an adult, married to a woman named Thelma. His assistant informs him that Thelma is having an affair with a magazine owner named Frank. Surprisingly, Ditlev does not seem shocked. He chooses not to confront the situation or take any action against her. At the same time, he is informed that 2 detectives have been asking questions about him. Back at the station, Carl and Assad regroup with Rose, who has organized the case into a clearer timeline. Through her findings, they learn that Henning was forced into early retirement after being labeled mentally unstable while investigating the deaths of his own children. Another detail stands out. During his investigation, Henning consistently marked Sundays on his calendar. They also discovered that the police once received a call from someone named Kirsten, just 1 hour after Thomas and Mary were killed. Kirsten is another name used by Kimmy. Realizing that Kimmy may be the key to everything, Carl asks his team to track her down. He also requests all phone recordings from June 12, 1994, the day of the murders. Elsewhere, Thelma is seen wearing a new dress, while Ditlev quietly studies her behavior. He is trying to confirm his suspicion about her affair, and in the end, it becomes clear that his doubts are true. Not long after, Ditlev contacts Ulrich and tells him everything. The two meet up and spend time using drugs while discussing recent events. They talk about Henning's death, believing it may have been intentional, almost as if he wanted to reopen the old case. They also mention the two detectives who have been questioning Bjarne. Soon after, they spot Frank leaving a room, and without hesitation, they attack him as revenge for the affair. Meanwhile, Carl returns home and begins reviewing the recordings one by one. He eventually finds the phone call from Kimmy. In the recording, she is crying and reports that both victims are already dead. However, the call suddenly cuts off, suggesting there was more she wanted to say. Carl brings this recording to Assad and Rose. As they analyze it further, Assad uncovers an important detail. Kimmy has been missing for years, with no official address or trace of her whereabouts. The only lead they have is her stepmother's address, and Kimmy has not been seen since the time of the murders, nearly 20 years ago. At the same time, Kimmy's current life is revealed. She is no longer part of the wealthy world she once belonged to. Instead, she is living on the streets, appearing unstable, and often talking to herself. Her behavior suggests she has been deeply affected by her past. The only person close to her now is another homeless woman named Tina. Carl and Assad decide to visit Kimmy's stepmother. She is clearly uncomfortable with their presence and describes Kimmy as a troubled and aggressive child in the past. When asked about Bjarne, she says she does not know him at all. The only thing she remembers is an incident involving a physics teacher. The school had once contacted her, claiming that Kimmy had been abused by that teacher. Following this lead, Carl and Assad track down the former physics teacher, Klavs, who is now working at a primary school. When they mention Kimmy, it brings back memories from 20 years ago. Back then, Kimmy had approached Klavs on her own. What started as a seemingly harmless encounter quickly turned into something much more serious. Shortly after, she accused him of inappropriate behavior and claimed he had abused her, along with other allegations tied to incidents in a forest known as FMK. Carl asks Klavs how he defended himself against those accusations. Klavs admits that he never fought back. Instead, he followed the instructions given by the school. Griven home had a reputation to protect, especially since many influential figures had studied there. To avoid scandal, Klavs was forced to resign, and his career was quietly pushed aside, leaving him to start over as a primary school teacher. Elsewhere, Ditlev and Ulrich are seen with their wealthy circle, preparing for a hunting trip. They set a zebra as their target, turning it into a twisted game where the reward is an entire villa. Among them is Krom, Bjarne's former lawyer, who reveals that the police have reopened the case of Thomas and Mary. He also mentions that Kimmy is now the key person they are trying to find. At the same time, Kimmy is once again wandering aimlessly through the streets, talking to herself. From a distance, she notices Albert approaching a group of homeless people. After he leaves, Kimmy gets closer and realizes he has been showing around an old photo of her from 20 years ago. The moment she understands that someone is actively searching for her, panic sets in. She quickly returns to her hiding place, an abandoned train carriage. There, her mental state becomes even more unstable as she begins hallucinating, seeing a younger version of Ditlev and desperately trying to push him away from her mind. Meanwhile, Carl and Assad head to the forest known as FMK, one of the locations connected to the past abuse linked to Klavs. As they explore the area, they realize the forest is located very close to the Grivenja home boarding school. They also notice a pattern. The students only had days off on Sundays, and both Thomas and Mary were killed on a Sunday. Back at the station, Carl and Assad go through the old case files again. It becomes clear that Thomas and Mary were not the only victims. Many students had suffered abuse during their time at the school. When they contact the surviving victims, a disturbing pattern emerges. All of them were attacked on Sundays, and the perpetrators always wore masks to hide their identities. At the same time, Rose uncovers another important detail from Kimmy's former classmates. Back then, Kimmy had been in a relationship with Ditlev, who is now a powerful businessman with major holdings in hotels, hospitals, and pharmacies. Kimmy was known to keep to herself, and the person who likely knew the most about her was Ditlev. With this information, Karl and Assad decide to confront Ditlev directly. He admits that he and Kimmy were involved, but only briefly. He describes her as wild and difficult, someone he could not handle for long. When asked about Bjarne, Ditlev confirms that he knew him and had met him several times. He also acknowledges that Bjarne's actions back then were disturbing. After the meeting, Karl and Assad leave, but something catches Karl's attention. He notices a photo showing Krom together with Ditlev and Ulrich during a recent hunting trip. Ditlev explains that Krom is his family's lawyer and has long-standing ties with them. Not long after, Karl receives new information from one of Kimmy's former classmates, who claims to have seen her in the city. Assad immediately follows up on the lead, asking around and showing her photo to people in the area. When he returns, he brings troubling news. It seems that they are not the only ones searching for Kimmy. Someone else is actively tracking her as well. At that point, Karl and his team begin to realize that this entire situation may be much bigger than they initially thought, and that someone could have been watching their every move from the very beginning. In the middle of the city, Albert finally tracks down Tina and bribes her with drugs in exchange for information about Kimmy's whereabouts. Not long after, he makes his way to Kimmy's hiding place, an abandoned train carriage, and suddenly tries to attack her. Kimmy manages to escape and rushes to Tina, hoping to find safety. But instead, she discovers drugs and old posters of herself from 20 years ago. It becomes clear that Tina has already been used to lure her out. As the truth sinks in, Tina can no longer hide what she has done. She eventually gives in, and soon after, she overdoses on the same drugs and dies. The story then shifts back 20 years into the past. At that time, Ditlev and Kimmy are seen together in the forest near their school, growing closer while he shows off his father's rifle. Their moment is suddenly interrupted when Thomas passes by and notices them. The next day, Ditlev and Ulrich confront Thomas on the field. They violently attack him as a warning to keep quiet. The story then returns to the present. Kimmy hears a knock, and outside, Karl and Assad have arrived, looking for Tina to question her about Kimmy. Sensing something is wrong, they force their way inside and discover Tina's lifeless body. At that moment, Karl hears movement and immediately gives chase. He eventually finds Kimmy just as she is about to escape. Karl tries to stop her, but Kimmy grabs a pipe and fights back. To show that he is not there to harm her, Karl lowers his weapon, but Kimmy still attacks him. Karl attempts to get answers about Thomas and Mary, but Kimmy refuses to cooperate and just wants to be left alone. Soon after, Marcus and other officers arrive at the scene. Karl explains that Kimmy is a key witness in the case, but also admits that she may have been involved. Marcus demands solid proof, but Karl and Assad have none at the moment. Still, Assad believes that if Kimmy is not the killer, then the real perpetrators must be connected to Griven home, possibly Ditlev or Ulrich, especially considering Kimmy's past relationship with Ditlev. Hearing Ditlev's name immediately catches Marcus's attention, as Ditlev is now a highly influential figure. At the same time, the police make a shocking discovery. Inside Kimmy's bag, they find the remains of a baby that appears to have been kept for many years. Meanwhile, Kimmy visits a public bath, where memories of her past begin to resurface. She recalls her relationship with Ditlev, including a moment when he became furious after failing a physics exam. He blamed their teacher, Klavs, and held a deep grudge against him. Driven by anger, Ditlev pressured Kimmy into helping him get revenge. His plan was to frame Klavs by making it seem like he had abused her. At first, Kimmy refused, but her feelings for Ditlev ran deep. Unable to disappoint him, she eventually agreed. At the same time, Ditlev and Kimmy continue their relationship as students, and it eventually leads to Kimmy becoming pregnant. Back in the present, Assad reviews a hospital report dated June 16, 1994, just 4 days after the deaths of Thomas and Mary. The report describes a young anonymous girl who arrived at the emergency room, claiming she had been beaten and abused. She refused to reveal her identity or the people responsible. Not long after, the baby she was carrying died. The doctors performed an emergency procedure, but before anything could be documented, the girl fled the hospital, taking the baby's body with her. Because of that, her identity was never confirmed. Meanwhile, Kimmy reappears at a nightclub, looking completely different from before. She approaches Albert and manages to lure him away from the crowd. However, Albert quickly recognizes her and attacks without hesitation. The situation escalates fast. Kimmy manages to defend herself, taking control of the situation and turning it against him. Under pressure, Albert finally reveals that he has been working for Ditlev. Moments later, Kimmy pushes him off a balcony, killing him instantly. Not long after, Karl and Assad arrive at the scene. They find Albert's body and begin digging into his background, eventually uncovering his connections to both Ditlev and Ulrich. At the same time, Kimmy heads to Ditlev's home, where he is with his family. She watches him from a distance and prepares to take her shot. But when the moment comes, she hesitates. Instead of seeing the man he is now, she sees the younger version of him that she once loved, and she cannot bring herself to pull the trigger. Soon, police vehicles arrive at the scene. Kimmy tries to leave but ends up crossing paths with them. Carl manages to calm her down, and this time, she is taken into custody without resistance. After that, Carl confronts Ditlev directly, making it clear that Kimmy is now in their hands and could expose everything. But Ditlev shows no fear and remains completely confident. Back at the station, Carl discovers a letter written by Kimmy to Ditlev. In it, she threatens to kill him, which only strengthens the case against her. The situation becomes even worse when her fingerprints and hair are found at the scene of Albert's death. Carl then visits Kimmy in detention, still believing that there is more to her story. He begins to connect the dots and suspects that she is the mother of the baby, whose remains were found earlier. The loss of that child seems to have completely shattered her life. As the truth comes out, it becomes clear that Ditlev is the father of the baby. Kimmy is overwhelmed with emotion, and Carl realizes just how deeply she has suffered. Despite everything, Carl offers her a chance. He promises to help her, but only if she is willing to cooperate and tell the truth. He is convinced that Ditlev and Ulrich are behind the murders of Thomas and Mary, but without Kimmy's testimony, he has no way to prove it. Kimmy finally reveals what she knows. She confirms that both Ditlev and Ulrich were responsible for acts of violence at Griven home. Ulrich in particular had disturbing habits, collecting personal items from his victims, including jewelry, clothing, and even hair, and keeping them as twisted souvenirs. Hearing this is enough for Carl. At that point, he is fully committed to seeing this case through, and he promises to stand by Kimmy as she prepares to face the judge. After that, Carl tells Assad that they need to search Ulrich's house. The problem is, they cannot just walk in without a warrant. With no clear way in, Assad decides to contact Thelma, Ditlev's wife, and asks to meet her. During their meeting, Assad shows her evidence of the brutal acts committed by Ulrich and Ditlev in the past. Faced with the truth, Thelma agrees to cooperate. She explains that Ulrich is a very private person who rarely leaves his house except for work. However, he has one weakness, and that is her. It turns out Ulrich has secretly been in love with Thelma, and they have been involved behind Ditlev's back. Using this to their advantage, Thelma contacts Ulrich and asks him to meet. Without hesitation, he agrees and leaves his house that very night. As soon as he is gone, Carl and Assad move in. They break a window, unlock the door from the inside, and enter the house. At the same time, Thelma meets Ulrich and keeps him distracted for as long as possible. But eventually, he receives a call about an alarm going off at his house and a suspicious vehicle outside. Realizing something is wrong, Ulrich rushes back home. Inside the house, Carl and Assad search the place carefully. They accidentally come across a housemaid and manage to calm her down. When they ask about a hidden room, she reveals that Ulrich has a secret space upstairs. They head up and uncover something disturbing. The room contains clear evidence of Ulrich's twisted behavior, including a collection of personal items taken from his victims. It confirms everything Kimmy had described. They gather the evidence and try to leave through the back door, but suddenly they are hit by tranquilizer darts and lose consciousness almost instantly. The story then shifts back 20 years into the past. At that time, Kimmy tells Ditlev that she is 4 months pregnant. Instead of reacting with concern, Ditlev shows no happiness at all. Not long after, Ulrich arrives with news that Thomas and Mary are home alone. The group decides to go to their house, and Ditlev insists that Kimmy comes with them. Soon after, Kimmy, Ditlev, Ulrich, and Bjarne enter the house wearing masks. They begin by attacking Thomas, then turn their attention to Mary in a much more disturbing way. During the chaos, Thomas manages to pull off a mask and recognizes Ditlev. With their identities exposed, everything escalates. Ditlev ends Mary's life, just as seen at the beginning, confirming that both victims are Henning's children. Overwhelmed by what is happening, Kimmy finally realizes things have gone too far. She leaves the house and tries to call the police, but before she can finish, Ditlev finds her, and the call is cut short. Kimmy runs, determined to cut ties with him for good. For a moment, she believes she has escaped, but soon after, 2 masked figures, believed to be Ditlev and Ulrich, catch up to her. In a desperate attempt to survive, Kimmy jumps out of a window and makes her way to a hospital, hoping her baby is still alive. She is quickly treated by the medical staff. The story then returns to the present. Kimmy is woken up by a police officer and told that she must appear in court that day. Realizing that Carl is not there, she sees an opportunity. Without hesitation, she attacks the officer and manages to escape once again. Meanwhile, Carl wakes up in a room filled with protected animals, clearly somewhere he is not meant to be. Moments later, a man named Milo, one of Ulrich's enforcers, drags him out roughly. Outside, Ulrich and Ditlev are already planning their next move. They intend to kill Karl and Assad by staging it as an accident, forcing them to drink until they appear intoxicated, then sending them off a bridge to make it look like reckless driving. Milo begins carrying out the plan, forcing large amounts of alcohol down Karl's throat. Karl tries to resist and even throws up, but Milo beats him and forces him to drink again. After that, Milo leaves the room, thinking everything is under control. But suddenly Kimmy appears. She attacks Milo and takes him down. She quickly helps Karl by forcing him to expel the alcohol. While searching the area, she finds Ulrich's collection of rifles and takes one. At the same time, Ditlev enters, expecting Milo to have everything ready. Instead, he finds Milo already dead. Then the power suddenly goes out. In the darkness, Kimmy reappears, now armed. Hearing gunshots, Ulrich rushes inside. Meanwhile, Karl manages to free himself and then unties Assad. The two arm themselves and move in, trying to regain control of the situation. Suddenly, Ulrich opens fire on them, forcing them to take cover and chase him deeper inside. At the same time, Kimmy continues her pursuit of Ditlev. After a tense struggle, she finally manages to overpower him. Elsewhere, Karl is still tracking Ulrich, but Ulrich keeps firing, making it difficult to advance. Just as Ulrich prepares to take another shot, Assad steps in and shoots him, ending his life on the spot. Back with Kimmy, she has Ditlev completely at her mercy. She prepares to finish it, while Karl approaches and tries to stop her. Kimmy makes it clear she is not backing down and fires a warning shot. In that moment, everything comes down to her choice. Despite everything that has happened, she still carries feelings for Ditlev. But in the end, she makes her decision. Then without hesitation, Kimmy steps into the fire herself, choosing to end it all along with the man who destroyed her life. As the flames grow out of control, Assad pulls Karl away just in time before the entire place is engulfed. Sometime later, Karl sits alone in his office, lost in his thoughts. The case that began 20 years ago is finally closed. The truth is now public, revealing that Ditlev and Ulrich, both powerful figures, were behind the murders along with their associate, Bjarne. Krom's name is also tied to the case, and investigations continue to determine how much he truly knew about their crimes. What remains unclear is just how many other crimes they may have committed over the years. Back at the office, Rose begins clearing the caseboard, removing the files one by one now that everything is resolved. Karl, however, remains still, struggling to process everything that has happened. So the moral of the story is never trust rich kids with too much free time, never date a guy who solves problems with violence, and maybe just stay home on Sundays.